Okay, a very good morning to all our dear viewers and listeners. Once again, you're welcome to our weekly talk show, ACFIM Talks. We've been doing this for the last coming to 4 months now, consistent. Every Friday, same time, we are here discussing nothing other than the topical issues that are mainly happening in our country, but we limit ourselves to things concerning money in politics. You can't talk about money in politics and you don't talk about the economy in itself. So today we are discussing and we are analyzing Uganda's economy, especially in the aftermath of the 2021 elections. With me in the studios, I have two individuals that I'm going to be introducing in a short while, but yours truly, I remain Felix Kafuma, your moderator again. And as usual, allow me to start before I introduce my guests. I first want to encourage each one of you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is ACFIM, so that you get the live updates on and how, especially when we'll be running these continuously. So please take some time, hit the tab, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is ACFIM. All right. In the studios, I have a lady and a gentleman. Both of them have a legal background, so I'm the only unlearned friend that said, but I'll catch up. Let me start with the lady. Since we are in a month where we are celebrating women, she's called Christine Byiringiro. I hope I get your names right, especially. She's the program manager under the Policy and Analysis Governance Program. She's working with Uganda Debt Network, UDN, one of those organizations that has a deep history in monitoring our debt, Uganda's debt. And I think part of this history is rooted in the way the Uganda's debt at some point was running out of hand, and they came up to advocate for a clean start. And I think we shall be having a discussion in that direction. So she has a bachelor's of law degree, and she's passionate about uplifting the plight of the poor and the marginalized to ensure that they realize their rights. She's passionate about supporting the poor people in the development agenda, and she's been in this business for the last 9 years. I think we have the right person to discuss issues concerning the economy of Uganda. Then our other colleague who has joined us in the studio is a man, a gentleman, also with a legal background. Goes by the names Katabazi Patrick. Is it so? Am I right?
Yes, it is.
Yes. He's an economist, but he's also a lawyer, and with a wealth of 16 professional experience in the areas of fiscal planning and analysis, public finance management, policy and legal reforms. He has done a lot of work around national budget analysis. I think I first met Katabazi when he was still working with Civil Society Budget Advocacy Group. At some point, we did some work together. Again, we were trying to understand the budget of Uganda as we were running towards the 2016 elections. So I'm very sure that we have the right person on the set. He has worked with the Parliamentary Budget Office for 8 years. He's an alumnus for International Monetary Fund Institute for Financial Programming and Policies. He's also the leading expert and advocate for expanding fiscal space for social protection in Uganda. And he has garnered a lot of experience trying to advise Parliament on social development sector. He has also undertaken a number of consultancies and coordinating a number of projects that involve government and development partners in the same direction. I think he's currently spearheading the creation of the Uganda Parliamentary Forum on Social Protection. And he has also coordinated the consultancy services on behalf of Cambridge Resources International as the national local representative for the development of national parameters in support for projects appraisal in public and private partnerships together with the Ministry of Finance. So we have wealth of experience to pick from in between Patrick and Christine. But let me first lay the foundation. If you've been following some of the revelations coming out of the Auditor General's report, there are a few things I need to first point out. One, I think the budget for 2020-2021 that has been approved is about slightly over 45 trillion. In 2019 and 2020, the budget projections then, which was approved, was about 40 trillion. Although I think much less was allocated and financed. But the things that are of importance and concern to us are the things that I want to look at in terms of one, the supplementary funding, because there are a number of questions around there. According to the Auditor General's report, no our supplementary budget, so they end up. I seem to be having a network problem. I think I'm back online. Our borrowing as government, as Uganda, has been growing exponentially at alarming levels. As I speak now, I think where we are at the moment, as of October 2020, our debt stock is standing at 63.35 trillion Uganda shillings. In June 2020, our loan portfolio was standing at 46 trillion. But if I can take you back, I think in 2016, our loan portfolio was standing at 28 trillion. So over the years, it has been growing. From 28 trillion in 2016 to now 63 trillion Uganda shillings, it means that we are not just about to stop borrowing. We just have an insatiable appetite for borrowing. So we have a discussion and conversation around that, and what does that mean to the ordinary Ugandan? Another thing that I think is important for us to talk about and discuss that is of importance as we move along are the issues to do with how our loans, when we are negotiating our loans, how secure is Uganda not find itself in a situation whereby our assets are mortgaged? Because John Pombe Magufuli, I think, has given us something to talk about and to reconsider. I may point out that majority of the things we are talking about Tanzania and the developments from the standard gauge railway to revival of Air Tanzania to the new terminal projects he has undertaken, to also to a point of where he has also been able to renegotiate, where he was able to renegotiate the loan agreements with the Chinese and other Western leaders, to a point of also ensuring that he expands education, constructing standard gauge railway. All those things he did, majority of it was done by local financing, without necessarily borrowing. But the arguments have been in the direction where Uganda is qualifying its appetite for borrowing, that we are undertaking a number of development projects that warrant us to continuously borrow. So I think it's important to also discuss in context of how has Tanzania been able to do all that using local resources without necessarily relying so much on borrowing, as opposed to Uganda that seems to be borrowing so much money to undertake all these resources, including financing shortfalls of the budget. So that said, let's dig deep into the conversations and get it started. I've lost Patrick briefly, but I'm going to start with Christine because Christine is still online. So Christine, let's start with the subject and the topic on issues concerning our debt. As I recall clearly, in 2000, there was that Jubilee 2000 Global Advocacy. I think we should be championed. You are familiar with those developments. At that point, we were among the highly indebted countries. And then, so we had a debt relief under the highly indebted poor countries, under one and under the cohort 2. But looks like we are almost back to where we were when that global advocacy took place. That said, why is Uganda, break it down for me and another ordinary person, why is Uganda finding itself in a situation that you addressed 20 years ago?
Thank you very much. Yes, we are finding ourselves in this same situation, if not worse, because of some of the reasons which I'm going to elaborate here. And one is because of the borrowing trends that we have taken over time. Just like you've mentioned, under HIPIC, that was the Highly Indebted Poor Countries Initiative, and later the MDRI, the Multilateral Debt Relief Initiative, Uganda actually achieved 100% debt forgiveness. Yeah. And one of the reasons is because most of the biggest part, actually, our borrowers, our lenders, sorry, were concessional. Yeah, the multilaterals, the World Bank, the IMF, and so that is why we were able to lobby, and the debt was forgiven. But moving forward, we shall see later that because we have taken on more commercial loans from private banks and individuals, it's going to be increasingly harder to convince them to forgive our debt. And what does this increasing debt mean to the ordinary man, to you and me? If we look at the ordinary man, maybe in Kubo down there, this means that you will have to be taxed more to pay this debt that we are accumulating at a high rate. This means the tax will, of course, be on the services and the goods that you procure. It could be on the sugar, on the salt. If you're going to board a taxi, the fare will have increased because of the fuel that has gone up. That is one. But secondly, how will it affect the common man? If this common man is a businessman, you have a small business enterprise, whether medium business enterprise, that means your chances of accessing credit to grow your business will go down. Yeah, because as government borrows, we shall see later that there's going to be an effect on our ability to borrow externally, which will push government to borrow domestically, and which we are seeing. And of course, this crowds out the private sector, because the banks and the lenders within are comfortable lending to government, and usually at high interest rates, because government is desperate for the money. And of course, it is safer to lend to government than to you, Felix, or to me, who will most likely default. So that is how it is going to affect the common man. And of course, this ultimately affects the development, because if I cannot access capital and grow my business, you cannot generate enough taxes from me to be able to pay back. Yes.
Wow, thank you. And this is why I bring in Patrick. Christine is trying to explain how I'm going to be affected by this relentless thirst of government borrowing. First of all, they have argued when they borrow that one, they are trying to finance shortfalls in financing the budget. I think for about 3 or 4 years running straight, revenue tax collection, URS failed to hit the target. So there are challenges there. But they're also arguing that they need this money to mainly fund these major infrastructure projects like Karuma, Isimba, Entebbe Express Highway, name it. But we've seen Tanzania address these challenges differently. The Auditor General, John Mwanga, in his report, he has actually been very, very disturbed by the way our borrowing is starting to become unsustainable, like those figures, because now it's standing at 63.35 trillion Uganda shillings. I want to understand who are the leading lenders to Uganda that we owe this amount of money, that we should be very scared of, and among the leading lenders, are there those that probably whose terms are more stringent, that if me as Felix, I should be very, very concerned about the future of this country? Because I know also for a fact that when you look at the loan agreements that have been signed by the government of Uganda, you realize that there have been a lot of waiver on the immunity Uganda has in accessing these credits. So what does that mean? I think, Katabazi, are you there? I seem to be losing Katabazi, but I would have, but let me bring you in here.
Yeah. So
okay. Katabazi is back online. Just hold it there. Katabazi, my question still stands, because I was trying to ask the pertinent question. Who are these leading lenders to the country called Uganda that we should be scared of? Are they among those ones who we should really be concerned about? For example, I know in Zambia, China is a problem now. Is Uganda in the same basket?
Yes, most of our loans are with international organization, some called multilateral organizations. But lately, we have started seeing other countries, such as China, lending to Uganda. Then we have, like Christina had already elaborated, companies, private companies, lending to Uganda. Examples of these are commercial banks that are lending Uganda through syndicated loans. I know some people who may not have heard of this might think it is far-fetched, but every time we have had a budget shortfall, government of Uganda has entered into arrangements with various banks in Uganda, for example, Standard Bank, Standard Chartered Bank, who have worked in syndicate with other banks outside Uganda for the purposes of raising money for onward lending to government of Uganda. So we can categorize the loans that we have, in my view, in three categories. The category of national organizations. These include World Bank, International Development Agency, African Development Bank, East African Development Bank. Then the other category is of companies or nations, companies targeted on nations or nations themselves, such as China, who are lending to Uganda. And then, of course, the other ones being private entities, including commercial banks. So for me, the issue is that borrowing is not bad per se. What is bad in borrowing, number one, is the terms under which you are borrowing. The terms. This is very critical. And also for what? Now, our debt sustainability strategy emphasizes that we ought to consider borrowing for concessional loans. These are low interest loans, but also loans whose maturity period is for such a long time. Those are low risk. As opposed to getting money from countries or multinational organizations whose interest is high, but they take so long. I mean, the repayment period is so short. So borrowing from whoever is not a problem. The problem is the terms. Some of the loans that we are getting have terms that are a little bit oppressive. You gave an example of Zambia, where some of the terms include confiscating or attaching the property for which the loan was secured. So that was one element. The second element is for what? We have had a problem as Uganda in respect to defining clearly what we are borrowing for. And that has been occasioned by lack of a particular department of government until recently that would be charged with a responsibility of project analysis, project appraisal, for the purposes of ensuring that the loan that you want secure is relevant, the amount is appropriate, and also the projections that are attached to that loan are reasonable. And in my view, that is where we have had a scenario where the Auditor General indicates in his reports time and again that so much of the loans have been secured, but for a period of 2 years to 3 years, some of these loans have even expired before they are utilized. Yet we have paid commitment fees, we have paid a lot of interest on them. So Ugandans should be wary of strict terms or harsh terms in the loan agreements, but also in the viability of the projects that we are borrowing for this money.
Wow, Patrick, thank you. But there's something here that to pick it up from there, and I think I'm going to first stay with you on this one. When you look at our debt, our external debt, which is about 67% of the total debt, you realize that the amount of money we're supposed to pay back and our budget projections, if we are to finance or to service these debts, we will not have any money left to finance the budget. When you look at the debt ratio and the budget allocations and the budget projections, we don't have so much left to finance our budget. So what does this mean? If to an ordinary Ugandan, what does this mean if you have a debt to pay and the amount you have is not even enough to run the country?
Yes, what it means that we are entering into, sooner than later, we are entering into a debt trap. In fact, it is not necessarily true that the money that we mobilize for resources is not enough to pay the debt. In fact, what we are doing is that we are entering into a phase where we are even borrowing to pay the debt. I'll give you an example. In the next financial year coming, the budget is projected at 45 trillion. The amount spent under various programs of government amounts to 29 trillion. Right? Meaning that we shall borrow to finance the budget by over 8 trillion because revenue projections are at 21 trillion. So we need to get the deficit of that being about 7 or 8 trillion to finance the budget alone. Then ultimately, you need again to borrow the rest of other monies for the purposes of not only financing the budget, but also for financing debt repayment, interest payments, as a matter of fact. So, to move to our answer, or the ordinary person, this means that number one, government does not have adequate resources to invest in the people. What do I mean? Where ordinary government has programs, for example, that deliver basic services such as health and education, if we continue in this trend, it will become extremely difficult for government to invest very efficiently in health, and in education. And that will negatively affect this other person, Muntu Awansi, who is expecting quality health services from a health center or education, better education services from a primary school and secondary school. The other element is that if government cannot generate enough resources for running its operations and is relying heavily on debt, it means that, like Christine had said, when the options of borrowing money from abroad are exhausted or have become less forthcoming, the focus is going to be in borrowing internally. And when the government borrows internally, it means that private individuals, will start competing with commercial banks. Now, how will that happen? Under normal circumstances, government borrows money from the private sector through commercial banks. And the commercial banks are happy to trade with government on that basis because government is not a risky borrower. But then that therefore means that it reduces the amount of money that is available for commercial banks to onward lend to private sector. Or if they do, then the interest rate shall only rise, and rise. So Muntu Awansi, again, if we continue borrowing at this rate, we'll find it extremely difficult as we go along to borrow money from the commercial bank because the interest rate will be going up because of the competition that will have been created by government. But also secondly, if government does not have adequate resources to invest in productive sectors such as social services, agriculture, it would therefore mean that the jobs that would have been needed to be created will not be there. And because that will not be there, it means that unemployment shall only continue to rise. And of course, where the economy is not performing, businesses are not starting, all businesses are collapsing, it means people cannot get jobs. Because they cannot get jobs, they cannot get employment, whether they cannot get income, and they cannot be able to meaningfully participate in the market, simply to purchase a few goods and services to run their life. So it also therefore means that the more the country gets indebted, the more it becomes constrained to look after its population, and the more its population ends up into abject poverty. Like Christine had said, we said at the beginning of the show, that the reason as to why we have debt relief, total debt relief, was because the world had come to realization that if these obligations persisted, it would be extremely difficult for governments to implement programs that will get people out of poverty. So the rise in poverty was the number one consideration for debt relief. So now if we are sliding back, it means that the gains that we have so far registered in addressing poverty will be undermined, and the Muntu Awansi would expect then for the situation not to improve, but actually to decline if we do not tame our debt appetite.
Okay. Still carrying the conversation from that direction. And in about 3 minutes, we'll be going in a short break. But before we go for a short break, I'm coming to you, Christine, on this one. Because for me, I'm still disturbed. First of all, in the Auditor General's report, again, I'll quote it. He talks about unspent, or there's under-absorption of funds. So at one point, you are borrowing to finance a budget deficit. But when you look at the Auditor General's findings, you find that there are some monies that are underspent. Okay, in actual sense, it's not even spent. But you're borrowing, arguing that the money you have is not enough. And then when we come to also the same report, it again talks about the under-absorption of loans. There are those loans whereby we've not necessarily we've borrowed, but we've not properly absorbed the money we've borrowed. So I'm trying to understand. I'm marrying the two. On one hand, you argue you don't have enough resources. On the other hand, the report is faulting you for, one, under-absorbing loans, and also under-absorbing the budget allocations that have been provided for. So does this speak to incompetence? Does this speak to theft? And when you answer that, put it in context of Tanzania again. I'm sorry, I'm going to point to Magufuli over and over, because for me, I think he proved something that many people, the naysayers who believed in the foreign support, I think are now rethinking the ideology. Because when you look at Magufuli, all that he did, the majority of it, came from how he was frugal in managing the resources that they had. So what does this mean for an ordinary person like me?
Thank you, Felix. And one, I have not been part of the people, or I do not agree with most of the people that say we do not have enough resources as a country to address our development needs or aspirations. Because like you clearly noted, you have under-absorption, you have wastage, in other words, the corruption. You have, for this coming budget, the 2021-22, we also the 481 billion for recapitalizing the Bank of Uganda that had bounced back, and yet the Bank of Uganda was not aware because they received the money last year, and now it comes back, and apparently the Ministry of Finance is saying, yeah, it's not yet approved anyway. So all this is about the management of the resources that we have. And the solution really is not in borrowing, because for as long as you keep borrowing and putting in a pot, maybe if you borrow and put in a pot that has a leakage, you will never be able to fill that pot. And I think that is where Tanzania, to be more specific, that's where Magufuli, may his soul rest in peace, got it right. You have to first address the corruption, the mismanagement, or the poor management, the lack of planning, the lack of absorption of the resources, before you even say that you do not have enough resources. Because we have money, the loans that are there sleeping, and sometimes the project time comes to an end, and yet the money is still there. It is not yet spent. One, because maybe the project affected persons have not been compensated yet, or many other anomalies in the planning. We do not plan before we get the resources. We just borrow, and then we begin planning backwards, and that has taken us back. But also maybe to add that why have we come to this? That is because one, like I said, we have moved more towards the non-concessional borrowing, and which wouldn't be bad, but it is a trap, because one, it allows you to fund your development aspiration, to fund the big infrastructure projects, because the funds are usually big, they're usually large sums of money compared to the concessional. But the danger is, again, that the interest, like Patrick had mentioned, is higher. The grant element is very minimal, and they expire in a short time. Their time frames are really usually short, among other things. So if you borrow such monies, and usually these are commercial lenders, like you had said, China and the private banks, so they are not willing to make any losses, right? You will not expect to now have another HIPIC or MDRI, because these are after money. They are making money, so they will not forgive you, unfortunately. So if you go this line of borrowing, that means you have to be frugal. You have to make sure you invest and reap what you're going to do to pay back, but also, fund your development. So that is where we have found ourselves in a trap, because we keep borrowing, and we are not strict on the misuse of these funds when we borrow them. And that is one of the reasons why we have reached where we are. And just to confirm that even the Ministry of Finance now acknowledges that we have moved from low debt distress to moderate. That means we are moving towards failing to pay back our debt, or getting into a debt trap. But also at the international level, we see some of these credit rating agencies giving us a bad credit rating, like you quoted the Auditor General's report. Fitch, which is one of the credit rating agencies, now gave us negative from positive in June 2020. Our credit rating was revised from stable to negative. And all this means that it is getting more and more risky for these lenders, the external lenders, to lend to Uganda. So that has really brought us to where we are, the increasing debt, and that is why we have to run to the domestic market. And yeah, we are really caught up in a trap, because even our economy seems to be growing downwards. We see it is from 6% in 2019 to 3%, and now as at December, we saw it was 2.9%. So all these external lenders are watching, and so just like we said, is government mortgaging our properties? Definitely that will have to be, because if I'm an external lender and government comes to me with this level of risk, one, I will make my interest expensive. I will have to move the insurance costs on this loan higher, yes, to discourage this person from borrowing. But if they are able to borrow, then it will be very, very expensive, and that is what is happening with us.
Wow.
So if we've got to borrow externally, which is most likely because we don't have resources to fund the budget, it's going to be very expensive. So we expect to see the debt rise even higher, and yet the economy is not growing commensurate.
Okay, thank you, Christine. We are going for a short break, but when we come back, we are going to discuss this whole thing about supplementary funding. Why? Because there are also issues around there, and I think we shall marry this with the timing of supplementary funding in line with when we were heading towards the 2021 elections, whether it had any indication on how our elections were financed in that matter. We shall also discuss issues concerning how we negotiate our loans, because again, the report points to how we seem to be giving away our immunity, the waiver we have for our immunity as a country, in the way we negotiate. And I think Ugandan must be very interested to know, what does this mean when you have a poorly negotiated loan? We will also discuss the whole issues of there's what we call what usually Parliament approves a certain threshold of what we can borrow, but it's very clear when you look at the report that with what was approved and what was actually borrowed is way above. Was this coincidental? We are going to have a discussion in that direction. So let's take a short break, then we'll be back in about a minute.